Hi, I'm Mark Coleman, Associate Pastor at Gymea Baptist Church. Before our Senior Pastor Mark Rader brings today's sermon from our series in Exodus entitled Set Free to Follow God, let me first let you know a few differences about this message. Mark will be using a first-person narrative technique to present this story from a perspective different to the one we might be familiar with. Although he is not in costume, from the very start, Mark will take on the character of a fictitious Egyptian official who works in Pharaoh's court. And throughout this message, Mark will use the Jewish word Yahweh to refer to God.
You may call me a traitor, and I suppose that's fair enough. I mean, I've certainly betrayed everything that I once held dear and everything that I once held to be true in my life. And why, you may ask? Well, when things go badly, when disaster strikes, when inexplicable things happen and the old answers no longer work, you begin to ask different questions, and occasionally you find different answers. I grew up knowing with absolute certainty that the source of blessing and prosperity and security and life was found in the gods and goddesses of Egypt and in their human representation, my Lord Pharaoh. I knew this as certain as I knew that the pyramids would last forever. And the entire pattern of my life followed that. I mean, I had never been given any reason to think otherwise. Whenever times were good, it was certainly because we had been pleasing to the gods. When things were bad, it was only their intervention that ended up restoring things to the way they had been. I knew with absolute certainty that this is where my life lay. Until recently. Until recently, before I was imprisoned, I was the chief steward of the Lord of the Two Kingdoms, the representation of Horus, the son of Ra himself, my Lord Pharaoh, king of Egypt. It's a position of influence and power and wealth, and as such, I was to the right of the throne when the prophet for the Hebrew God Yahweh entered into the court. He stuttered through some sort of demand that the Hebrews needed to be released so they could serve Yahweh. You can imagine the way the court responded. I mean, the Hebrews live in the ghetto of Goshen, descended from some Canaanite shepherd. They claim that years and years ago they provided some sort of incredible service to a previous dynasty. They claim that it's part of some promise of their God to bless the entire world, and I don't know about that. All I know is they set down their shepherd's crooks for a much more honorable task. They became brickmakers, and we need brickmakers. Even now, my Lord Pharaoh is constructing the temple that will perpetuate his glory and remain long beyond his reign, letting the world know of his greatness. And not only the temple, but the myriad of storage depots. And for that, we need bricks. And for generations, the Hebrews have served the pharaohs and the gods that they represent. So when this Moses shows up and demands that Pharaoh let the Hebrews go because Yahweh says. Well, when the laughter had died down, Pharaoh said what was on all of our minds. Who is Yahweh? Some two-bit family deity from the backwater of Canaan? Who is Yahweh that I should obey him and let Israel go? I don't know who Yahweh is, and I will not let them go. Well, that seemed to stump the poor boy because he kind of turned and left without another word. And that might have been the end of it, except that we heard that Moses' words had made a far greater impression upon the Hebrews than they had upon us. Oh, the Hebrews, they took this to heart. They believed that the promise that Yahweh would take them out of Egypt and plant them in Canaan, they believed that that would come to pass. And because their hearts had taken that lie in, their work became half-hearted. And so Pharaoh, in his wisdom, gave a command. The quota of bricks that they were to create remained the same, but the straw that we provided to strengthen the mud and clay, that would be taken away. Remind them who they serve. Remind them who they serve. And it's not Yahweh, it's Pharaoh, as the representation of the gods themselves. And you know what? They surrendered to Pharaoh's will like that. They scattered looking for stubble. Oh, they complained, certainly. They cried out for relief, certainly. But they complained to Pharaoh. They cried out to relief for Pharaoh, and they continued to make bricks for Pharaoh. Yahweh? Him they forgot. But Moses wasn't done. He came back to court shortly after that and said that this time, so that we would know who Yahweh was, that he would show us the signs and wonders of his power. A contest between the gods and goddesses of Egypt on one side and Yahweh on the other. And the first sign of his power did nothing to convince us that we should obey him. Moses took the staff in his hand and threw it on the ground, and it became a cobra. You're unfamiliar with Egyptian symbolism, I take it. A cobra was a symbol used by multiple deities who were given the task of protecting and nurturing Egypt. If you get a chance to see Pharaoh's headdress, on the forehead is a rearing cobra as a representation of the goddess who nurtures and protects him. This was the symbol that Yahweh chose to show his power. It's our symbol. And the sniggers in the court turned into laughter when at a word from Pharaoh, the magicians threw their staves down and they became cobras too. If this was the best that Yahweh had, this was going to be an awfully short contest. An awfully short contest. And something a little unusual happened. The cobras, rearing and hissing and spitting at one another, began to fight, and over the next few relatively grisly minutes, the serpent of Yahweh swallowed up the others, and Moses took up his staff and walked out of the court, leaving the magicians empty-handed. Odd, but nothing to worry about, right? Well, the next morning, Moses met my Lord at the Nile River and said, in order that you might know that Yahweh is God, I'm about to strike the Nile River and it will turn to blood. And he took the staff that had been a serpent and struck the water. And from that very place, the water began to turn red and it blossomed out. And by mid-morning, reports had come in from all over the country that rivers and canals and dams and the river itself had become undrinkable. It had turned to blood. Fish died. The river stank. And what was perhaps most distressing for myself and others in the court was that the gods of Egypt seemed helpless to stop this. Well, the seed of doubt that was in my heart was quickly snatched away, because Pharaoh's magician stepped forward and took some fresh water from some jars and they poured it on the ground, and it too became blood. No big deal. Then eventually, after 7 days, the water of the Nile once again flowed clear. It was drinkable again. The power of Yahweh had failed to strike the source, and Pharaoh refused to let the people go. Well, Moses reappeared and said this time that there were going to be frogs. You don't know Egyptian symbolism. One of the goddesses of fertility and childbirth takes the form of a frog. It was as if Yahweh was taking the symbol of protection in the cobra and the symbol of life in the Nile River, and now the symbol of fertility, and trying to tell us something about who actually controlled those things. And as Moses held his staff over the waters, the water began to seethe, and soon frogs swarmed all over the land. They were everywhere. They were in the palace, they were in the courtyards, they were in the stables, they were in homes. You couldn't get rid of them. They were in the bedrooms, in the kitchens, and the noise. the noise. And the magicians, they were able to take jars of water and bring forth frogs from that as well. But just as in the case of the river, and just as in the case with the staves, there was something not quite right because they couldn't get rid of the frogs. They couldn't change the water from blood back into drinkable water. They couldn't get their staves back. And so ultimately, my Lord Pharaoh summoned Moses and began to offer some concessions. First, that the people could actually worship Yahweh in Goshen, in Egypt, as one of our own pantheon, right? Subordinate to Pharaoh, but one of our gods. And when that was rejected, he would allow them to leave the land, but not 3 days' journey, just a little way into. And Yahweh relented. And as soon as he did, and the frogs left, died where they were, or returned to the Nile, Pharaoh refused to let them go. I doubted that he was ever going to let them go. I mean, and ultimately his concessions that he then pulled back were actually part of his own self-serving mechanism, right? Any God who couldn't see into Pharaoh's heart, any God who had no idea about the deception, any God who could be so easily duped into giving up, surely Pharaoh had the upper hand. Moses didn't look surprised. He merely took his staff and he struck the ground, and the dust billowed up and up and up and became a towering column of dust that turned into buzzing, stinging, biting gnats. And then when the magicians stepped forward and they struck the ground, nothing happened. Pharaoh still refused to let the people of Israel go. And as if to justify his refusal, a breeze that evening blew the gnats away, and things seemed fine. Until the next morning when Moses met us at the river for the second time and said that in order that we might know that Yahweh was Lord, he was going to send flies. And there wouldn't not just be flies everywhere, but he would deal differently with his people. And in the land of Goshen, there would not be a fly found. And this very thing happened. Flies poured into the country. They were everywhere, all over the place, except in Goshen. And I began to wonder, just how powerful was Yahweh? His power extended to the water and to the land and to the air. Did it extend further? Did it extend to life and to death and to the netherworld? How far did his power go? Well, after the flies had left, Moses appeared again. This time, saying that because we would still not listen, because we still refused, that he was going to send the full force of his plagues against us. It's going to be a storm such as we had never seen before. And as he left, he warned us to bring in our animals, to bring in our servants lest they die. You see, before the storm, there had been 2 others. Our livestock had died, sheep, goats, cattle, camels, donkeys, the lot. Boils had broken out on the people and animals, festering open sores, except in the land of Goshen. But I had seen enough. And so when Moses left and Pharaoh did nothing, I summoned my servant to me, and I sent him to my estate. And I told him to bring in what animals remained. And I told him to harvest what could be harvested. And I told him to make sure that our servants and my family were inside. And that began my imprisonment, you see. Because in that moment, what I was stating was that I no longer believed that Pharaoh could protect me. I no longer believed that the gods and goddesses that he represented were able to stand against Yahweh. And while I could not yet trust Yahweh, I could at least obey the word of his servant. And it may have been treasonous, but it was also wise. Because when the storm came, and it wasn't just ferocious wind and the rain and the hail and the thunder and the lightning and the destruction that wrought. It was as if the gods themselves had appeared. It was as if Seth, the god of chaos and of storms, or as I'm beginning to believe, it was as if Yahweh himself had arrived. And it was the terror of God's appearance that led Pharaoh to summon Moses one more time, to shout over the wind and the thunder, "I have sinned. Yahweh is right. Would you pray for us? And we will let you go." I don't know that Moses believed him any more than he had any of the other times, because as he left, he said, "I will pray for you, but I know that you or your officials do not yet fear Yahweh." And while that was certainly true for Pharaoh, it was becoming less true for me. And so when the storm abated and Pharaoh refused again, and Moses returned once more, he asked this question, a question that cut me to the heart. He said, "How long will you refuse to humble yourself before Yahweh?" And while he was addressing my Lord, the question came to me. I had decided, I had recognized that the gods and goddesses of Egypt were not able to protect me, were not able to look out for me, were not able to give me the security that I so desperately wanted for myself and my family, but I had not yet placed my trust in Yahweh. How long would I refuse to humble my heart? And perhaps that question is why, when Moses declared that there would be a plague of locusts, that I snapped. I turned to Pharaoh and I said, "How long will this man be a snare to us? Let the Hebrews go and serve Yahweh. Don't you see that Egypt is ruined?" And that might have cost me my life right then and right there if it weren't for the murmur of assent that ran through the court. And so against his better judgment, Pharaoh called Moses in again and questioned him about who would be going. But when he was told that men, women, children, and all their animals would go, his fury broke. He accused them of evil, he accused them of changing the deal, and he drove them from his presence. And me. He drove me from his presence, and I've been imprisoned ever since. Well, the locusts came, and the gods were unable to stop them. And the locusts went at the word of Yahweh, not the word of any of the Egyptian gods. And if I had any doubts yet that Yahweh was the one true God, they were swept away by the darkness that followed. One of the most significant and prominent gods in the Egyptian pantheon is Ra, symbolized by the noonday sun, the creator of heaven and earth, the sustainer of all things. And he was unable to break through and penetrate, to pierce the darkness that Yahweh sent on our land. For 3 days, torches and lamps were kept lit, and they only just kept the darkness at bay. And while some would say that ultimately Ra broke free from Yahweh's darkness, I know better. You see, for those 3 days, the people of Israel, the Hebrews in Goshen, had light, and they walked in the light. And I have since heard of Pharaoh's attempts to control the situation, of his attempts to negotiate and to offer, of his anger at Moses, and I have heard of one more sign. Unless Pharaoh relents and lets the Hebrews go, every firstborn child in Egypt will die. And he will not relent. And so I've sent for my wife, and I have told her to take what livestock remains, to take what grain and wine remains, to take the best of our clothes and garments, to take any article of silver and gold and bronze, anything valuable, take the family and go to Goshen and beg a Hebrew family to take us in. Perhaps the blessing that they believed was destined for all nations might extend to us. I don't know if I'll ever get out of these. I don't know if this prison will be my last home. But I do know that while my wrists are chained, my heart has been set free. From all those claims of a man to control my destiny, to determine my fate, to provide what I need, to give me security and health and well-being and success. I have been set free from those lies. And I now trust in Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, and in his servant, his appointed servant. And I have been set free. Call me a traitor if you like. But are you any different? What do you trust in? Where does your trust lie? Where is your hope for security? When things go badly, when things go wrong, when inexplicable things happen, are the answers that you have always been given, are they still working for you? Or do you need to find new answers? Learn from me, friends. Learn from me. Put your trust in Yahweh, the God of Israel, and in his appointed servant, and you will be free. You will be free indeed.
We hope you've enjoyed today's New Horizons program. You can download the companion study guides for each program from the Gymea Baptist Church website. Go to gymeabaptist.org.au/New Horizons. These are available for each episode, or you can download the whole series. Gymea Baptist Church in Sydney's southern suburbs is a contemporary evangelical church seeking to serve our local community and help them to know Jesus. At the heart of all we do is the desire to help people love God in all aspects of their lives. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so via the contact page on our website or visit our Facebook page.
This morning we've heard a beautiful story of an Egyptian official who moved from trusting Pharaoh to trusting Yahweh, to trusting God. Yet in that story we've also heard how the Israelites so easily forgot God, and we so easily forget God too. I know I do. Is God inviting us to trust him more as we hear this message? Is God reminding us that he is trustworthy and true? Is God asking us, have we had our hearts set free? Don't forget, you can download the printed studies for this series from our website. We're so thankful you have joined us. We look forward to seeing you again soon.